Mass Effect 2. What is there to say about this game that hasn't been said before other than it did everything right? Tight gameplay, unforgettable squadmates, stunning graphics, an expanded universe that can rival the likes of other iconic science fiction franchises. You can say all these things about the trilogy in general, but Mass Effect 2 is considered the peak, and one of the best games of all time, period. But how did it get to that point? Mass Effect as a franchise traces its roots back to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, a space opera RPG with planet exploration and finding companions of different alien species to join you along the way. But entering the 7th generation, BioWare wanted to do something similar, but they wanted to create their own IP that would target a more mature audience and apply a more accessible gameplay style with real-time combat. Set nearly 200 years into the future, well beyond the solar system, you created a character named Commander Shepard with your own backstory, psychological profile, and class. Sure, options were minimal, but what made this game stand out was how decisions and actions affected the outcomes of certain situations and the level of morality involved. There was voice dialogue from the main protagonist, a BioWare first, lots of memorable characters, and cool looking planets to explore. It was one of the main reasons to buy an Xbox 360 in 2007, which is saying something. And still, it wasn't enough. BioWare rushing development to meet the deadline meant that despite the acclaim, even back then there were a lot of faults to point out. Controls were clunky both on foot and the vehicle, a lot of the assignments and planets you entered were repetitive, loading times particularly on elevators were long, endless moments of texture pop-in, and the inventory system was overbloated. But otherwise, BioWare had a good idea of where the series needed to go. And being planned as a trilogy from scratch, they went straight to work on the follow-up, creating a giant checklist of all the things the developers, fans, forums, and reviews said and categorized everything. And for the first few months, they put sole focus on the combat system, which gave them an easier time removing a lot of uncertainty about other features. Like instead of using a chain of powers all in one go, only one can be used in short spurts. And instead of waiting for weapons to recharge, it uses an ammo system, which was a highly debated feature during development. Nearly all the developers were against the idea before they tested it themselves and eventually came around to the idea. And how they got to that point, they had the list of features they wanted to implement into the gameplay, but most of them didn't make the final cut. But with all the testing and prototypes they made using the first game as a base to basically say to themselves, okay, let's try this instead, or this. And that's what helped them meet their desired objective, and eventually return focus on the RPG aspects, which were scaled back to the point of also feeling like a completely different game compared to the predecessor. The final result not only made it easier to pick up and play, but also made life easier for the developers, being noted as the easiest to work on without any bad working conditions. And considering that BioWare were also in the middle of making Dragon Age Origins and Sonic Chronicles on top of Mass Effect 2, in addition to a global recession and pandemic at the time, they were still able to keep the project on time and under budget. I guess all the stars aligned at that point and fate was kind to BioWare.
It'll be better than the old days.
I hope so. I died.
Yeah, you were such a downer.
Yeah, you see, about what Shepard just said, when Mass Effect 2 was officially announced on February 2009, the first trailer revealed that Commander Shepard was... what? Killed in action? And Geth is wearing Shepard's N7 armor? Obviously, if you played this game, you know exactly why. But back in 2009, the thought of Shepard being KIA confused and probably scared a lot of people. Was Shepard really dead in the Mass Effect follow-up? Would there be a new protagonist? What was going on? However, at that year's E3 showing footage of Shepard as the playable character again, Hudson explained that the suicide mission being the main premise, at some point in the story, depending on your actions, it's possible for Shepard to be killed along with every single squadmate. But that wasn't the only thing, and they didn't mention that part. Mass Effect 2 was released for the Xbox 360 and PC on January 2010, and on the PlayStation 3 a year later, which BioWare initially denied for a long time. But when the developer was acquired by EA in 2007, the publisher emphasized the importance of releasing games on multiple platforms. The PS3 version used a modified version of the Unreal 3 engine that would be used to run Mass Effect 3, and since it was released a year later, all the DLC apart from Arrival was included as standard, and for a long time this was the version I grew accustomed to after downloading the Mass Effect trilogy off the PlayStation Store in 2015. Like my recent re-review of Gran Turismo 3, I actually reviewed the Mass Effect trilogy way back in 2016 when this was the number of subscribers ColourShed had. I plan to return to the trilogy a year later, even re-reviewing the first game in the process, but this was the point when I realized that open world and racing games were highly popular on this channel, and that's why I released so many reviews based on those genres, leaving Mass Effect lost in space. And because I was trying to release as many reviews as I could, really going for it, I barely had any leisure time for games either, so I didn't even play another Mass Effect game for nearly 3 years until I had my first real break from my channel, which completely rejuvenated my love for the franchise. And this was just before EA officially announced a remaster of the trilogy, the Legendary Edition. And after I bought an Xbox Series X for Christmas last year, this was one of the first games I bought for that system, and the version I'm using to finally continue where I left off half a decade ago. However, also being a sequel to a highly story-driven trilogy, keeping this review spoiler-free is simply an impossibility. So to those who are watching this video and haven't played Mass Effect 2, what I'll do is vaguely talk about the general outcomes of certain missions, like the prologue for example. Nothing that'll seriously spoil it. And when I reach the parts that would, it'll be towards the end of the review and I'll give you guys a heads up. For now, this is the spoiler-free part of the review.
If we lose Shepard, humanity might well follow.
Then see to it that we don't lose him.
Yeah, you heard that right. But before we continue, I want to thank one of the leading VPNs available, Surfshark, for sponsoring this review. The web is practically a digital Wild West, so it's extremely important for everyone to have the best possible security and privacy when exploring it. And VPN Surfshark is the go-to option. It encrypts all the data sent from your device and the internet and protects it from big companies, hackers, cybercriminals, and even the shadow broker. And with thousands of servers in 95 countries to choose from, Surfshark can also be used to gain access to streaming services and online stores that might not be available in your country. Whether it's the service or the store itself, a certain movie, TV show, or season, simply change the country with the app and connect. Don't let where you live hold you back anymore. A subscription gives you unlimited number of devices tied to your account, unlike other known VPNs. It's easy to set up on any platform with loads of secure servers to access, and if you use the code CSP, you get an 83% discount and an additional 3 months for free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the video description below, so secure your digital life today.
I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite store on the Citadel.
Following the events from the first Mass Effect, Commander Shepard, a bloody icon leading a team of Alliance soldiers, alien allies, aka some of the best video game characters ever, as well as the Normandy, saved the universe from the Geth invading the Citadel to open a portal for the Reapers to invade and eliminate all organic life across the galaxy, a cycle that occurs every 50,000 years. But it's only the beginning. The Citadel Council still deny the Reapers exist because of course they do, their heads being buried in cement is a trademark of the franchise.
Ah yes, Reapers. We have dismissed that claim.
They see Sovereign as nothing more than a giant Geth ship, and for the next few months the Council orders the Normandy crew to clear the rest of the Geth across the galaxy.
It's not the Geth. Brace for evasive maneuvers!
But then, an unknown ship appears out of nowhere, attacks the Normandy with such force that everyone evacuates, and Commander Shepard is caught in the blast, stranded into open space with a ruptured suit, and dies. Wow. However, after the title card, Shepard wakes up like he or she had just been born, and barely escaped from a research station with assistance from Miranda Lawson and Jacob Taylor, but without a clue of what's going on.
Did you say 2 years? I've been gone that long?
It turns out in the 2 years between the Normandy destruction and up to this point, Cerberus, a pro-human organization looking to advance humanity as the superior race in the galaxy. Despite Shepard's history, they recovered the body with the intent of bringing him or her back to life, known as the Lazarus Project. Why?
We're at war. No one wants to admit it, but humanity is under attack.
While Shepard was recovering from death, human colonies across the Terminus systems are disappearing without a single trace of foul play or surveillance, just empty colonies.
There's virtually no evidence that anything unusual happened at all, except that every man, woman, and child is gone.
And after Shepard, Miranda, and Jacob investigate Freedom's progress, they discover that the Collectors are behind the abductions and are working with the Reapers. And seeming like nobody from the Alliance or the Council wants to help, Shepard reluctantly agrees to work with Cerberus to stop them. Since it involves going through the Omega-4 relay, one that no ship has ever returned, Shepard is given a new Normandy, and nearly a dozen dossiers of mercenaries to recruit across the galaxy.
I'll fight for you.
I'm glad you saw reason.
All in the name of giving themselves the highest chance of success. To put it all in one sentence, a suicide mission.
Sounds a bit like a suicide mission.
Pretty much.
Okay, how else do I explain the plot of Mass Effect 2 without fully spoiling it? Being a planned trilogy, what the first game did was introduce you to how the universe operates through the Citadel, the mass relays, the different species, their perception on humanity's recent influence. These are important things to get your head around before diving into the follow-up.
Just like old times, huh?
Also, one of the standout features is being able to use the save file of the first game and import it into Mass Effect 2, where all the previous decisions you made, the things you said, even the assignments carry consequences for better or worse.
I wish I'd done that the first time we met.
Now in Mass Effect 2 specifically, it's more or less subtle, like messages at your private terminal, a random interaction, returning characters, unique dialogue during conversations to the tiniest of sentences.
Shepard, but you're dead.
I got better.
It's obviously more noticeable to me because of the hundreds of hours I put into the Mass Effect trilogy, but how can I describe this? It's still build your crew and investigate these crucial areas. All the main story missions and assignments don't change. It doesn't exactly alter the entire narrative with 12 different endings, but nonetheless, what's here is incredible branch storytelling and long-term planning that extends the replay value exponentially. The way BioWare pulled it off was, again, fan feedback, recording what the players did in a playthrough and look at all the possible ways to spread it all out, make sure no stone is left unturned, basically. And yeah, I feel like there's no other way to play Mass Effect 2 unless you've imported your save file. If you don't, then yes, you can still technically get the best possible ending regarding your crew, but you're only experiencing 80% of what makes this game a masterpiece. There's also an interactive comic book at the start of the game which allows the player to make those crucial decisions without having to play the predecessor, which to be fair was handy for those who had the PlayStation 3 version back in 2011 since the first game wasn't released for that system until nearly 2 years later, and the Wii U port of Mass Effect 3 which also had these comic books, that it was the only title in the trilogy released for that system. Also, if you import the save file, it can be used as an optional recap, say if you haven't played through Mass Effect in a while.
Just another routine mission. Why do they always say that before a mission?
That said, now that there are lots of different ways to play through the whole trilogy, even though the first Mass Effect has shown its age in recent years, it's still worth trying to 100% it and take all those previous actions for additional immersion, connection, and explanation to what's going on in the story here in Mass Effect 2, given how self-referential each passing title in the trilogy gets.
Everyone was always ignoring you and hitting on me. Time for you to get a fair shot at it.
After Shepard takes command of the Normandy, aside from a few collector-based missions, the main body of the game involves recruiting squad members all over the galaxy and dealing with their daddy issues, which sounds about as entertaining as an Australian soap opera, but not too long it'll be your favorite thing to do in a Mass Effect game. According to the developers, it isn't the exotic locations or entire civilizations, it's the characters that stand out in the storyline in all forms of entertainment. The number of squadmates here, if you include DLC, has doubled from the first game, and there are more missions which allow for more individual encounters. Now obviously everyone's top 2 is going to be Tali and Garrus in no order.
Can it wait for a bit? I'm in the middle of some calibrations.
But all the ones introduced in this game are just as memorable, and I like them all, including the ones outside your squad like Kelly Chambers, Dr. Chukwas, Joker, and Edie.
Joker?
I can tell when it's listening.
I am always listening, Mr. Moreau.
I know!
I think the best way to summarize them all is to look at the state of the galaxy at this point in the trilogy. Humanity just played a key role in saving it, and the perception amongst other alien races is polarizing.
You humans are all racist.
And you also have the conflict between the Geth and Quarians, the Krogan genophage, the reputation of Cerberus, everyone disapproving Shepard joining them. These things shape these characters, whether it's Mordin's conflict with the genophage modification, Jack being used as a test subject when she was an infant, or Miranda's loyalty to Cerberus and being very protective of her younger sister.
I'm very good at just about anything I choose to do.
These sorts of things were also briefly brought up by the original crew, but being second in a planned trilogy, it's all expanded even further. It feels seamless, and it's honestly compelling to listen to, with the exception of Jacob.
No argument there, Commander.
You complete a recruitment mission, talk to the person that just joined your crew, and decide to walk around the Normandy chatting with a few other squad mates. Next thing you know, half an hour has passed before entering uncharted worlds. It just flew by. And there's one mission where I explored every dialogue wheel, which could take an additional 20 minutes and was completely optional. And that's how much I wanted to know about this galaxy and everybody's backstories.
You have a ship named Quib?
Oh, here we go.
These guys are more than just additional power options. There's enough character development to have their own spin-off title. Like, I'd happily play a Mass Effect game controlling Garrus with his own team, shooting bad guys in Omega.
You realize this plan has me walking into hell too. Just like old times.
Like the predecessor, you can also step things up a notch by becoming intimate with one of these characters. Sure, again, it's just a couple of lines where if you talk to a character long enough, you can unlock a suggestive cutscene, but every time I lock Shepard in, it puts a big smile on my face. They're really adorable moments.
Figured. People always want something.
And because you have additional squad mates, there are additional romance options, including Garrus and Tali from the first game. Again, thanks to fan feedback, because that's how beloved these two are. And since romantic relationships can also carry from an imported save file, you can either show fidelity, cool it off, or just cheat on them. Just expect a response from them later on with the latter. For me, the hardest part of the whole playthrough, the whole trilogy playing as male Shep, it genuinely took me a week to decide between Liara and Tali. I eventually chose Liara because I got involved with her in the first game and wanted to stay loyal. But as for Fem Shep, well, there was no need to think about it. How could you pick anyone but Garrus?
Some women find facial scars attractive. Mind you, most of those women are Krogan.
In all seriousness, there is no right or wrong choice here, because almost all relationships, they feel developed enough to feel canon with the story. If anything, it's almost worth going back and replaying the whole trilogy just to explore these different options. It's just another layer of what makes these characters so likable. This is why whenever I play as Commander Shepard, I typically steer towards the Paragon side. I just can't bring myself to be a massive jerk to the crew, even if it can be funny at times.
Here's to simply being happily drunk.
I'll drink to that.
Commander Shepard as a character, there isn't as much change in him or her, still barely any emotion, at least in the dialogue. Weird considering the way the game starts, and yet despite that, you can write a whole book with all the hilariously savage lines that come out of Shepard's mouth, because they're endless.
Give me a name or I'll cut your balls off and sell them to a Krogan.
The morality system is nearly identical from the first game. It allows you to choose your approach to certain moments, whether it's through conversation or decision making, which affects your alignment, the facial scarring on Shepard, and unlocks additional dialogue options.
That's what I do. Solve problems.
You think you can fix this? Why not?
It still feels like you're basically selecting between good guy and bad guy in a situation. However, what makes these conversations more engaging is Shepard having dialogue outside moments when you have the option to select one, and being able to interrupt other characters, something the developers originally planned for Mass Effect 1, like an alternate version of the same options if you decide to select it before they're done talking. But here, there are moments that occur outside the dialogue options, like another way to show compassion or ruthlessness.
I like this human. She understands.
They work for both Paragon and Renegade side of the morality spectrum and provide some of the most memorable moments of the trilogy. Whether it's a Paragon interrupt comforting another character at a time of grief, or the Renegade side with Shepard basically saying, "Oh, shut up.
You talk too much."
See? The human cannot hit a simple target.
There are some interrupts where the number of morality points you earn from these is too inconsistent. For example, shooting an already broken enemy robot is apparently as morally conflicting as pushing someone out the window to their death. Nothing more to say.
How about goodbye?
Although I only feel this way thanks to the way the morality system as a whole is structured, being percentage based, but I'll save that part for the spoiler part of the video. As you might have noticed, this game is kind of like the Star Wars Empire Strikes Back of the Mass Effect trilogy, in which the narrative takes a darker turn. Another thing fans wanted based on collected feedback, and the developers were more than happy to give them. The prologue, for example, sets that tone perfectly. The Normandy, the ship that carried your crew, entered unexplored worlds, but then this new enemy suddenly obliterated it like it was made of cardboard, along with the main protagonist. which, yeah, that's bold. And for the first few hours, like Shepard, everything's a blur. It's been 2 years after the Normandy attack and a new alien species is causing chaos. It's a massive eye-opener that's full throttle right up to the moment when you return to a different Normandy ship. And working for Cerberus, who were secondary enemies in the first game, they're the ones that brought you back to life.
You and I are on the same side. We just have different methods.
Mind you, the number of times the Illusive Man says the word humanity sounds like a pretty dangerous drinking game. In some ways, if you played Mass Effect 2 before the third one, you do sort of think Cerberus have the best intentions in mind, since no one else is helping. Some say that in Mass Effect 3 they became, in Joker's words, too mainstream and evil, but the way I see it, the clues hiding their true nature are present here, especially in the Overlord DLC and Jack's loyalty mission.
Remember, Shepard, these people thought enslaving Thorian creepers and Rachni was a good idea.
Side note, Tali only says this when you did the Cerberus missions from the first game and imported the save file. Just one example of the unique dialogue if you're paying attention. And when the Reapers get closer, it's all there. It's not as surprising given how many times I played through the Mass Effect trilogy, but there's a more violent edge to it. You get a closer look at how they operate. Like saying it out loud, enemies made up of multiple or even dozens of dead humans processed together. Sounds like something that belongs in a Dead Space title. In all the areas that make their debut in the trilogy, you can almost add cyberpunk as a subgenre. The Omega asteroid, the Collector ships, Quarian fleets, Krogan home planet Tuchanka, and the Illusive Man's base with that giant orange-blue star in the background. For a long time before I decided to finally play through the Mass Effect trilogy, this room along with the Illusive Man's theme was the first thing that came to mind. Sure, the Citadel, the heart of galactic civilization, is back, but the theme is absent upon returning and it's almost exclusively set in the lower wards. Again, Mass Effect 1 provided the foundations for the player to become familiar with how the universe generally operates, but this one really emphasizes that while the Reapers aren't causing Armageddon just yet, the galaxy is mostly a terrible place that Shepard needs to rely on since higher-ups aren't helping, and that's where all the squad mates to recruit are located. Kind of ironic they're trying to save it. And yet, it's all absolutely stunning to look and walk through. It just bleeds atmosphere all over your TV screen or computer monitor. There's a better use of camera angles, it moves around more, there's an extra emphasis on lighting. Just looking at the close-up shots of these characters, particularly Thane and Tali, are some of the most beautiful I've ever seen in a video game. And there's more body language and emotion in the dialogue. I mean, a couple of cheesy moments here and there, but you would be amazed by the volume of talent voicing these characters that I can't single out any of them. And of course, I have to bring up the soundtrack composed by Wall of Sound, led by Jack Wall. Taking inspiration from bands including Tangerine Dream and movies like Tron and Blade Runner. Because every squad mate has their own mission, whether you're recruiting them or helping them out, which I'll get to, they all have their own theme, which is meant to match the locations they're in, their mood and intentions. Samara and Asari Justicar, for example, on an Asari planet, the music has a fantasy inspiration to it, and it certainly sounds different from Grunt fighting a Threshermore, for example.
Our enemies are in trouble, Shepard, and we better not run out of targets.
There's not one song that doesn't underwhelm, but if I had to pick a couple of standouts, the Illusive Man's theme. There's no build-up since he only talks to you the entire game, but it's like the music is telling you there's a mystique behind him and you probably shouldn't trust him.
It's never that simple. You of all people should know that.
And yet, it's so catchy it might as well be the official theme of Mass Effect 2. You say the game's title, the Illusive Man's theme is immediately humming in your head. But the best of probably the entire trilogy is the suicide mission, particularly when it reaches its peak, giving you legit goosebumps every single time you play Mass Effect 2 up to that point.
The Collectors killed you once, and all they did is piss you off. I can't imagine they'll stop you this time.
And any glitches and bugs feel way less frequent. If any that do occur, it's usually more amusing than game-breaking. One example is returning character Conrad Werner accusing Shepard of pointing a gun at his face regardless of whether or not you actually did that in the first game. Like, he's supposed to have different dialogue based on your previous actions, but not in this case.
Conrad.
But when you have literally hundreds of unique interactions and dialogue depending on how well you play both the first and second Mass Effect, it's quite the task trying to keep track of every single one. Now, you think they would have fixed something like this with an update by this point? Delete data like this on the way to real errors.
That's pretty extreme, Shepard.
Laugh it up, Tali.
Yeah, laugh it up, Tali. That's another infamous bug right there. That's the thing with the Legendary Edition, with all the graphical improvements from the original, these meme-generating bugs are left intact. But honestly though, I'm only nitpicking because of the hundreds of hours I put into this game. It's easy to spot these things. From a technical standpoint, the only thing I didn't like about Mass Effect 2 for a long time using a digital copy on the PlayStation 3, the loading times were borderline unbearable on occasion. Particularly on the Normandy, it would take a full minute just to load one of the decks. Sure, there are a lot of visually appealing loading screens in comparison, with a terminal illustrating ships landing, elevators moving, humans reconstructed, but it always took an eternity. I realized after getting a physical copy it was much better. But compare it to the version I'm using for this review, the Legendary Edition, well, now it only takes a few seconds. Here's a brief side-by-side comparison between the original and Legendary Edition. You can clearly see an improvement in resolution, frame rate, and lighting. Although since this game uses a lot of pre-made cutscenes, the jump between 30 frames to 60 or more isn't exactly subtle. It happens a lot on the missions set on Ilium, but again, only a minor nitpick. And unlike the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect 1, there are no changes to the gameplay mechanics or mission structure either. But then if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
What are you doing here?
First we're gonna kill you, then we'll see.
Casey Hudson said it wasn't as drastic of a change in combat mechanics compared to the predecessor. You still choose 2 crew members on a mission and fight your way through enemies with weapons and powers and gain experience points to improve your attributes. There's just a higher emphasis on tighter controls over inventory variety. Like the predecessor, you start by selecting Commander Shepard's first name, backstory, psychological profile, and class. For this review, playing through this game twice with both genders, I used different classes to see what combat, tech, and biotic abilities felt like to use when controlling Shepard. Believe it or not, this is the first time I'm playing through this game with a class other than a soldier, since the assault rifle is by far my favorite weapon of choice. However, classes aren't as different from each other as I was expecting. Maybe because Squadmates have those abilities themselves and I already know how each one works. With the only drastic difference being forced to use only pistols and SMGs. They seem to run out of ammo more easily than you'd expect. It comes down to how much you value power-ups and understanding the strengths and weaknesses, just as you'd expect from the RPG genre.
Warning. Enemy
Nice.
Even before Mass Effect 2 was released, some thought the way everything's set up is too simplistic to be considered a true RPG, that there isn't enough variety for players to create their own unique experience, that instead of the developers trying to improve the issues on certain features, they just took the features away. Basically, in descending order, it's an interactive story, a third-person shooter, and then an RPG. I will concede that in terms of customizing Shepard, yeah, there isn't much here. The character creator, for example, is completely unchanged from the predecessor. I was hoping things would be different in the Legendary Edition, but apart from a few additional haircuts taken from Andromeda, it's shallow. Although, to be truthful, I'm not very good with facial customization in any video game, and besides, the default faces of Shepard are iconic to the franchise. And outside of that, the only other customizable aspects include collecting hamsters, fish, and model ships for your quarters, and choosing the colors of your armor. And even then, there aren't that many options, only 2 patterns. This is why I stuck with the N7 armor, because I wanted Shepard walking around with lots of different colors throughout the playthrough, either based on the planet he or she is on, or looking as vibrant as my channel logo. You can get some solid looking color schemes, and yes, there are special armors too. The one from Dragon Age is probably the coolest, but you can't customize those ones. Point is, there's barely anything to help distinguish one Commander Shepard from the other based on many different playthroughs. You can play around with the sliders all you want, but each Shepard you make will look similar to the other, like they're related. But the developers weren't bothered with this, because their top priority was to make a fun game more than most. I admit, I'm not the most patient gamer in the world when it comes to the RPG genre, especially the turn-based ones. They're very time-consuming just to get to grips with what your playable character is capable of. Genuinely, the first time I ever played Mass Effect, I went through the entire game right up to the final boss without using any of the powers because that's how clueless I am.
Really? This guy? Why?
But Mass Effect 2, the developers wanted the player to pause the game as little as possible. You still have powers and weapons that differ based on the class you select at the beginning. But even though it might look the same in the footage, it just feels less clunky to control. When you're on the front line, the shooting mechanics resemble more closely to Gears of War, with a dedicated cover system, melee attack, partial auto-aim and ammo system, and enemies with more accurate weapons that try to surround you rather than stand still. Even going from a PlayStation 3 controller to an Xbox Series X, these controls are second nature, nothing to criticize. It also helps that it has a proper tutorial at the beginning teaching you how the controls and powers work. They're easy to underrate these days, especially if it's your favorite game. You don't need to know how the mechanics work every time you start a new game, but it integrates with the story nicely.
I've had enough of this station to last a lifetime.
Or 2, in your case.
Experience points and levels are earned after the mission is complete, and item and weapon selection can't be changed in the pause menu. Gone are hundreds of different equipment that completely and literally filled your inventory, and gone is all that time converting it into Omnigel to clear enough space.
Remember the old days when you could just slap Omnigel on everything?
That security upgrade made a lot of people unhappy.
They would also say, I hated it. It really was the worst part of Mass Effect 1, especially in the Legendary Edition, where to be fair, they try to fix it by letting you highlight and delete multiple items at the same time. But if you accidentally highlight too many in one go, you can find yourself stuck in the menu with no other option but to reset the whole game. I'm on the opinion that too much stuff can be distracting, like it's easy to be too focused on finding weapons with the highest stats. But in Mass Effect 2, all you do is add, not swap back and forth every 10 minutes. And in some cases, an upgrade from the first game is just an individual ability that carries across all weapons.
On the ground, now!
Bullets and powers also appear visually clearer, enemies reacting to them, headshots are more damaging. It's so satisfying using the most powerful assault rifle at close range and seeing the health of some of the strongest enemies disappear almost instantly. And despite the story's darker tone, the gameplay cues and HUDs have more color than just light blue. Another little detail to make quicker decisions during combat.
I'll put them down!
Squad members having dialogue during gameplay is also a nice touch, although because you hear the same lines nearly every enemy encounter, like hearing Miranda say,
"There we go!"
or Garrus saying,
"Never saw me coming!"
These lines, for example, are practically tattooed into my brain. It gets repetitive after a while, another reason to choose a different squad duo every mission. And as brilliant as the music sounds in this game, the cues clearly indicate when you're entering a wave of enemies or reaching near the end of a mission to a fault. Each squadmate, whether you're recruiting them or gaining their loyalty, they have their own theme which you can hear more than once. Just the way the music builds up and down several times, it makes it sound more monotonous than it actually is. Particularly in the longer DLCs, they take nearly an hour long and you're just hearing the same song loop over and over again. Although compare it to the first game where it sounded like the same song is looping every half minute and doesn't build during gameplay in most cases, the whole package is still light years better. That said, what you like to get out of the RPG genre will obviously affect whether it was a good thing for the trilogy. In the first Mass Effect, in Casey Hudson's direct words, because the core story had so much intensity and pressure around it, when you would go off and do a side mission, it didn't have that kind of intensity and it wasn't directly linked as part of the story. I wouldn't say it was the only reason. The way the first game was structured was a few planets that would take at least an hour to clear the main storyline mission, and the rest of them it felt like you were doing the exact same thing over and over, with the only changes being the buildings you entered. And even then, there were only 4 of them. Keep in mind, there were at least a couple dozen of these assignment missions, and after you complete one, all you get is a text box saying what happens next, or maybe a small cutscene, then either return to the Citadel or get a message from Admiral Hackett saying the situation was worse than we expected, so huge thanks for helping. But because the game was rushed for release, this was the best BioWare could do back then. Hudson also didn't expect players to compare these side missions to the main ones, which is why Mass Effect 2 is structured the way it is. The developers wanted every single mission to feel like it was as important as the other. Instead of open maps, they're essentially linear shooter levels more purpose designed for all these planets, allowing developers to do more graphically because there are barely any design elements recycled from a previous level. level, providing a much better atmosphere. Even an obstacle unique to the planet, like the burning sun on Haystrom, using lightning rods against the enemies on a giant ship, or simply remaining inconspicuous. They're just the right length, too, around half an hour each, never feeling like they overstay their welcome, and leaves you with many opportunities to experiment with different squadmate duos. And it's until you're walking around a city, Citadel, and the Normandy, interacting with people, finding missions and assignments all over the universe, does it resemble closer to a traditional RPG. From my experience, these smaller assignment missions aren't entirely necessary to get the best outcome after beating it, but going back to being able to import a save file, it's really cool talking to so many characters on different planets, especially the returning ones, with some interactions in assignments only unlocked if you either interacted with or if they survived the events of the predecessor.
Finding you in a place like this makes me think letting you go was a mistake. You don't want that.
We agree on that.
And that's all the motivation you need to not miss anything if you decide to replay the Mass Effect trilogy. The only serious repetitive aspect of Mass Effect 2 is how you gather resources by scanning the planets by launching probes during Uncharted Worlds, a way to compensate for the lack of open maps.
Launching probe.
I think the reason people hate the space mining part of the game is not just because they're boring, but it's very easy to feel compelled to scan every single nook and cranny since they're necessary in upgrading the ship and yourself. Especially if you're playing this game on a harder difficulty, or if you detect an anomaly which triggers an assignment. Normally what I do is stop after the scanner results reach moderate levels. With one exception.
Really, Commander?
Come on, Edie. Say it.
Probing Uranus.
Thank you. At least the map lets you know how much percent has been discovered on each galaxy, so there's no need to backtrack. Going back to the story, a majority of the game involves recruiting squad members and stopping the collectors, of course, but in the middle of it, they'll ask for Shepard to talk about a personal issue which requires your assistance. Another part of getting the crew ready for the Omega-4 relay. There were loyalty missions in the predecessor per se, but there aren't as many consequences that carry into Mass Effect 2 apart from a couple of dialogue options.
Remember when I gave you that Geth data tally? Did it help you complete your pilgrimage?
Yes, it did.
Maybe it was another thing BioWare wanted to fully fledge in Mass Effect 1 but didn't due to lack of time, and finally had a chance to realize its potential here, because it's another one of the best things about this game. Here, every single crew member has a loyalty mission, and while technically optional, they're treated as if they're the main missions where each one is a major supporting character of a TV episode, their own chance to shine. Even if, well, not to give away too many of the subplots, most of these missions are just the same story, with a squadmate at some point being like, wait, that's not supposed to be the case, and mostly involving a family member. They're still awesome nonetheless. If I have a criticism, I wish there was more unique dialogue for the crew members on these loyalty missions. The ones involving Garrus, Tali, and Miranda, for example, the other chosen squadmate literally doesn't say a word in any of the cutscenes, which doesn't make sense, especially if you bring Mordin with you.
Think I've cured Joker's condition. Simple treatment would... No, would cause liver failure. Never mind. Start from scratch.
In fact, I find myself pressing the regroup button every once in a while just to keep the dialogue somewhat unique.
You bet!
After you.
Thing is, I'm only saying this because the unique dialogue is one of my favorite things about Mass Effect 2. Hearing lines from different crew members talking amongst themselves, their perspective of certain situations. I understand that these loyalty missions center on one squadmate, it's their story, and there are a few unique lines here and there.
I said a badass, not some scout whining like a quarian with a tummy ache.
I'm standing right here.
I just wish there was more, if only the actors were given a few extra days to record more lines.
Let's remember that next time Shepard sets us up against impossible odds.
Twice a day, on average.
Most of the time, I'm not being stupid about it.
I think it's obvious from this review I really like having Mordin, Tali, and Garrus as squad mates. Other loyalty missions come in the form of DLC, which because I grew up with the PlayStation 3 version, which had almost all of it included. First time I played Mass Effect 2, I couldn't tell those certain missions I was playing were just long DLCs. They were seamless, and I can't see myself playing this game without them. And the Legendary Edition has every single one of them, including the special weapons and outfits for Shepard and the squad mates. It's actually the first ever playthrough of the Arrival DLC for me. While the Hammerhead controls better than the Mako, it's still not brilliant, and the extra squad mates Kasumi and Zaire, good characters that I wish had their own proper interactions like the rest of the crew.
Edie has a wicked sense of humor. Or I should say, a really funny lack of one. Sometimes she seems like a person, But when it comes down to it, I can't get past her being a computer.
This should have been part of the full game to begin with. However, the standouts are definitely Overlord and Lair of the Shadow Broker, especially the latter. Plenty of gameplay time, lots of cool level designs. You have Liara as a squad mate, and as I just demonstrated, a chance to rekindle the relationship if you romanced her in the predecessor, and plenty of what happened between the prologue and the revival of Shepard is explained in this DLC.
So, you rescued me.
Anyway, after gaining a squad member's loyalty, they acquire an additional ability, outfit, and an improved chance of survival in the suicide mission. However, there are a couple of moments when two loyal squad mates will get into a disagreement. Again, going back to the state of the galaxy, that's what causes them. And Shepard has to either pick the side of one or the other. Or if you have a high enough morality score, you can persuade both of them to cool off the argument. Unfortunately, if you pick a side, you lose the loyalty of the other. And this brings me to my biggest pet peeve that I didn't think about until I was writing this script. And this is the spoiler part of the review, but it needs to be said because it's affected the way I've played this game for years.
This is a mistake, Shepard. A mistake that my people may have to pay for.
One of these confrontations, the one involving Jack and Miranda specifically, trying to break it up with a charm is one of the hardest parts of the whole game, especially if you're determined to keep all of your squad mates loyal and alive in the suicide mission and in Mass Effect 3. Okay, story-wise, it sounds immature to lose the loyalty of one of your squad mates completely over one argument considering what you did for them to gain that loyalty in the first place. But going back to the way the morality system works, it's percentage-based where it's not about adding enough moral points in the attribute screen to unlock additional dialogue options. Instead, it's based on how many Paragon or Renegade-based responses you've selected throughout the whole game. So say the higher the volume of Paragon 1s you select, the more charm-based dialogue options you unlock. I don't know why on the status screen it doesn't have one bar with the number of Paragon and Renegade points in ratio form, similar to what they did in Knights of the Old Republic or even Mass Effect 3. That would have made more sense visually to get an idea of where Shepard was at morally. Anyway, with this fight, it requires an insanely high percentage to break up the fight, and if you know this, it means you feel compelled to stick to either Paragon or Renegade and absolutely nothing else.
Our mission is too important to let personal feelings get in the way.
Fortunately, despite a few Renegade moments here and there because I can't help myself, I stuck with Paragon more than enough times that I was able to break up the Jack-Miranda fight peacefully.
Good thing you broke up that catfight between Jack and Miranda. I was afraid they'd tear a hole in the hull.
Although it could be because the Legendary Edition supposedly reduced the percentage of Paragon and Renegade points needed for certain key moments like these crew fights. If that's true, then it's no longer a pet peeve, but the original version, it certainly is. Having a percentage-based system for morality, it's a good idea in practice. It stops people from filling the bar by cheating the system. He's looking at you, Laurie Keene.
Always a pleasure, Spectre.
But it's not executed properly. I imagine a lot of you like to mix dialogue options around. It keeps the interactions interesting and hilarious.
You're working too hard.
And speaking of this motivation to keep everyone alive, it also means you need to complete the missions in a certain order, making sure all the loyalty ones are complete before the next investigation-based mission, the one involving acquiring the Reaper IFF. Therefore, one really good character doesn't get anywhere near enough time it deserves. A little harsh given that he was in the teaser trailer.
Geth do not intentionally infiltrate.
Because if you take too long after the Reaper IFF is acquired and installed, the crew outside your squad mates are kidnapped and they'll die if you do an extra mission before initiating the suicide mission. Essentially, you have a choice of having Legion in some of these main missions over crew casualties.
I don't even want to think about it.
I suppose after you beat the game, unlike the other titles in the trilogy, you can go back and finish any other assignments and DLC that you might have missed, so there's your excuse to use Legion multiple times. It's very confusing to understand what I'm saying unless you've played the Mass Effect games. It's another reason I'm saving this point for the spoiler part of the review. But once you know the correct way to ensure everyone survives the quote suicide mission, keeping every squad mate loyal and get the best possible outcomes when importing the save file for Mass Effect 3, you feel compelled to stick with a Paragon or Renegade response almost 100% of the time and do certain missions in the correct order. And this makes the game more linear than appears on the surface.
Just once I'd like to ask someone for help and hear them say, sure, let's go, right now, no strings attached.
Well, Shepard, that would make the game too boring. Make no mistake, every Paragon playthrough, for example, it feels satisfying being the Crusader, being nice to the crew, helping them out. Again, I can't bring myself to be nasty to them. It's just Mass Effect 2 is such a dialogue-driven game that encourages you to create your own version of Shepard. But if you want the best case scenario, you feel restricted in doing that. In a way, it's another customization aspect that's lacking. I mean, this is from the perspective of someone who's lost count on the number of total playthroughs of this game. Compare it to someone who's going into it the first time. It is a blur, and it's designed for you to figure it out, and after the first few tries, it's fun to discover the best pathway to complete these missions. And to see your entire crew on the Normandy just before the closing credits is unbelievably fulfilling.
The collectors are about to find out what happens when you piss me off.
You got it, Commander.
And this coincidentally brings me to the suicide mission. All the work that's been put in, upgrades equipped, loyalty gained, and rapport you built with your crew, everything comes down to this mission. The reason the Illusive Man brought Shepard back from the dead. Throughout this mission, there are certain scenarios, and how you handle them determine whether or not a crew member dies in the middle of it. The first wave entering the base, for example, judges the type of upgrades installed on the Normandy. Say if you didn't upgrade a shield, armor, or weapon, a squadmate is killed in the process. Then after landing and planning how to intentionally infiltrate the base, you need to assign specific roles in the middle, whether it's event specialist, kinetic barrier holder, or leading another team. And whether or not they're loyal, again, affects the fatality rate, so there's a lot of strategy and knowledge about your crew required to undertake this mission effectively. And after completing it, depending on who lives or dies, it carries into Mass Effect 3. The only thing I can say from experience is that you're guaranteed to not keep everyone alive on your first playthrough. Take mine, for example. I got all but one of the squad choices in terms of leading a second team and specialist correct, but my biggest mistake was not upgrading the Normandy, which already took out a few squad mates in the process. In fact, I didn't even release Grunt or Legion because I thought they'd be more trouble than they were, which, thinking about it today, just hurts my soul. Again, this was my first ever attempt. You live and learn. And after playing through Mass Effect 3 with less main characters alive, when I reviewed the trilogy back in 2016, second attempt, I was determined to get everything right.
I'll do whatever it takes to stop the collectors, but I plan to live to tell about it.
I'm glad you're in charge.
And I did, fortunately, and after countless playthroughs over the years, each decision required to keep everyone alive is now second nature. It's not like one of these time-based heat of the moments. You can think about it before entering the next phase of the suicide mission.
Well, at least he knows what he's doing.
But what is such a ballsy move is to have characters written this well that can just die if you didn't plan the mission properly. And if you lose enough squad mates, as initially teased, even Shepard dies. And while the game ends, you can't import the save file into Mass Effect 3, you have to start all over again. Sounds like the sort of thing that would make a gamer explode in anger, but fair enough. Honestly, if you lose Garrus in the suicide mission, that alone should be an automatic critical mission failure. Considering Mass Effect was a planned trilogy, kinda weird this game would take a risk of allowing the game to end in a way that Shepard can die too. But then you'd have to be really deliberately bad to do that, to fill your curiosity.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
In a way, this mission puts high-level theatrics over context by this point. Like, I'm not completely overwhelmed by the revelation of a giant human Reaper, because if the Reapers are able to bulldoze through the universe without it, as demonstrated in Mass Effect 3, it kind of makes the purpose of the Collectors abducting human colonies pointless, apart from reducing the human population before the main invasion.
This thing is an abomination.
But if you put story, presentation, and gameplay together, the Collector base is a stunning abomination, the level designs differ each phase, everything you did up to this point, all the actions and dialogue options, whether you realize it or not, it really does come down to this mission. The game's strength of character development is all the motivation you need to take all the right steps to keep everyone alive, and again, that music score right from the moment you enter the Omega 4 relay to destroying the human Reaper, to racing back to the Normandy while Harbinger is taunting you, to the base being destroyed in the background, I'm left speechless every single time. And to think this isn't the main ending of the trilogy, combined with Shepard looking through the window of the Normandy after the mission to see these Reapers ready to invade, giving me goosebumps one last time, and you have the perfect ending to set the stage for Mass Effect 3. After the ending credits, you can also talk to the crew after it's done, which is a nice way to celebrate and reflect on what just went down. It's just 1 or 2 bits of dialogue, but I like it.
For Sarah, now the Collectors, remind me never to get on your bad side, Shepard. I almost feel sorry for the Reapers.
And unlike the other two Mass Effect games, you have the option to continue completing missions and other stuff before importing the save file. In fact, some of these missions and DLC fit better story-wise after the main story is complete. Like Shepard finally has the time to clear up any unfinished business before the Reapers actually invade.
Besides, I'm not so sure this is a Cerberus ship anymore. Right?
To give you an idea of just how much I love Mass Effect 2, for this video I played through the whole game trying to 100% it as best as I can, twice, and yet I never got sick of it. I still had endless moments when I had to force myself to stop playing because hours just flew by. Now, based on the last time I reviewed Mass Effect 2 back in 2016 with a lot more experience now, I do notice a lot more flaws. It's not 100% objectively perfect, but then what game is? But even then, aside from being forced to complete missions in a certain order and stick to one side of morality, these are mostly nitpicks. Mass Effect 2 might not be the most revolutionary game ever made, with the option to import a save file from the predecessor being the only feature that can only be done in a gaming franchise planning to have a follow-up in advance, hoping the first game is successful enough. Would Mass Effect 2 be better if BioWare didn't downgrade the skill point or inventory system? Maybe. But given the time it took to make the follow-up, it was definitely the right call to focus on control and storytelling over inventory variety. It's the most accessible in the Mass Effect trilogy, one of the most accessible RPGs out there. The more you play these games, the more you respect the unique dialogue with literally hundreds of potential options based on the way you play it, and if you find yourself personally ranking which of these squad mates are your favorite and struggling to do so, that perfectly sums up just how memorable they all are. Just the overall strides in making Mass Effect 2 better in nearly every conceivable way. It's leaps and bounds from the predecessor. The peak of BioWare, one of the best games of the decade, the 7th generation, and probably speaking too much from the heart, but it is in that league of video gaming perfection. Some might say it's overrated by today's standards, but it's still a personal top 5 all-time favorite of mine. The sort of game or trilogy that I'm obligated to play through at least once a year, even with the very little time I have available, and this is a big reason for it. Once again, thank you BioWare for the journey, and I'll surely return soon. Spenny out. Okay, I'm not done with the thanks just yet. Thank you guys on Patreon for your support, particularly Alex Vidal, Bibbs, Brittleback, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, David Myers, Eric Barboza, Ian Walker, Jerry Thomas, Mike Camilli, Molag Montego, and VXL. Also, thank you Surfshark for sponsoring this review, and of course, all of you for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end. I mean, phew, that was a long one. This review was both incredibly fun and a massive grind to make at the same time. Again, I never, and I mean never got sick of playing Mass Effect 2 when capturing gameplay, but due to the sheer scope of this video, endless calibrations, it felt never ending to make. And because it's not an open world or racing game review, there's no guarantee it'll be a highly viewed video compared to something like Need for Speed or Grand Theft Auto. But even with all that said, to quote Tali Zora, totally worth it. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, support on Patreon, follow on Twitter, like on Facebook. Thanks for watching, and I should go.